This is part 1 of Chapter 54's lecture, and we're going to take a look at community ecology. And these are the AP Board's learning objectives that coincide with this chapter. Things that you should focus in on and know are listed here, so you can pause this and jot down some of the main terms that you need to make sure you're covering. But understand some of these relationships between members of populations, different species within a community. So first of all, we need to define what is a community. It looks like I've lost some of my box here, so let me fix that. Okay, that's better. So first of all, the definition of a community is all the organisms that live together in a place and the interactions between them. More specifically, it's different species and populations that are interacting together in one place. So community ecology is going to be the study of those interactions among all the populations sharing that common environment. By definition, the species have to be living close enough for a potential interaction to occur. So question, you can see here this watering hole. And a question would be, what types of interactions are occurring among all these different species? The next definition that we should focus on is the ecological niche. So an ecological niche is the sum of a species' use of its biotic and abiotic resources. So this ecological niche can also be thought of as the organism's role in the ecological system. So one scientist broke it down as basically the habitat or the address that the population is residing at, and the niche is its job. So the niche is going to be more the role than just the address. It's going beyond the habitat. This picture that we see here, we talked about in class a little bit, but competitive exclusion is occurring here when two species that are closely related are competing, and they end up, one is actually going to outcompete the other. We'll look at this a little bit more in a few more slides. So competitive exclusion is defined as, or is actually dictated by the fact that there are no two similar species who can occupy the same niche at the same time. So they can have similar roles, and if they do, there's this competitive situation is set up, and so the interaction between those populations is going to force the exclusion of one or the other. What can happen is either the exclusion, or we can have, over time, resource partitioning. So this happens with sympatric species. By definition, we'll learn about sympatric and allopatric when we're studying evolution. But for now, know that sympatric means that they're residing in the same geographic location. So two species that are, again, in the same general vicinity and they're competing for the same resources are going to have to figure out some way to get along and survive. So again, we can have that competitive exclusion occur, or we can have some sort of resource partitioning. The picture that you see here is of Dominican Republic lizards. There are actually 7 different species of these types of lizards that live in close proximity to each other. They all feed on the same insects and small arthropods. So the competition for food is fierce, but over time it's been reduced because each lizard species has learned to eat and use those resources or have access to those resources at different times. They've partitioned the available resources to reduce the competition between them. This is another example of the same type of partitioning, or actually it's not the same type, but it is also resource partitioning. In this case, there are two mice that are closely related. There's a spiny mouse and a golden spiny mouse, and they share similar microhabitats and food sources. So wherever they co-occur, the spiny mouse has become active at night or nocturnal, and the golden spiny mouse has become diurnal, which means it's active during the day. What they found through research is that the one that became diurnal is actually naturally nocturnal. But what happens to this resource partitioning, in order to survive, this species of mouse has overridden its biological clock in order to coexist with the other closely related mouse, the common spiny mouse. But what they found in research is if they removed all the regular common spiny mice from the environment, then these golden spiny mice actually became nocturnal again. So this type of resource partitioning is called temporal partitioning. Temporal having to do with time, because they are, again, feeding at different times of day. Another possibility we can find happening with resource partitioning is a character displacement. And that's defined as the tendency for a characteristic to become more and more divergent in these sympatric populations, as opposed to allopatric populations that are living in totally separate areas. So if populations are living in a similar area, if they're in close proximity to each other, again, they're sympatric. And so over time, natural selection favors some character changes that allow them to access resources in a different way. So the next concept we're going to look at is interspecific interactions. So we can have interspecific competition, which we saw with these previous examples, where interspecific means between two different species. And we can also have different sorts of interactions. So any type of interspecific interaction is a relationship between two species living in the same community. And we classify them by whether they help, harm, or have no effect on the species involved. And we symbolize this with a plus, minus, or a zero. So if it's a helpful relationship, you have a plus sign. If it doesn't harm nor help, you have a zero. And if it harms one of the species, you have a negative sign. So these are the different types of interspecific interactions we can have. We can have symbiosis, which is broken down into mutualism or commensalism or parasitism. We can have herbivory, predation, competition, and facilitation. So we're going to look at each of these individually. The symbiotic ones are probably the ones you're most familiar with, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those, but just remind yourself that mutualism relationships mean that both species benefit, like algae and fungus that live together, or commensalism, where we have hitchhikers attached to a whale here, barnacles, where they don't harm the whale, but they certainly get a big benefit from it. And then parasitism, which is missing its symbols here, where the host is harmed, but the parasite is helped. So we have a negative and positive interaction, similar to the predation one. Looking at this is a carrier crab, and it's carrying a sea urchin on its back. And that sea urchin, as you know, sea urchins have poisonous spines. So it's actually getting some protection from its predator, and the sea urchin's getting a free ride. So what type of symbiosis would this be? And hopefully you guessed that it's mutualism. Here are some examples again of the different types of symbiotic relationships. The commensalism, where we have this bush here is growing out of the tree. Obviously it's getting some benefit here, but in this case it's not hurting the tree, and so it's commensal. The mutualism we have here with the clownfish and the sea anemone, and in this case both are benefiting. With mutualism, we can have two types. We have obligate or facultative. If it's obligate, that means at least one of the species involved is necessary for its survival to have that relationship. When it's facultative, it means that they could actually do without. Either one could do without the relationship, even though it's beneficial. With parasitism, we have, again, the victim is harmed. The parasite, in this case, these are parasitic wasps on the caterpillar, so they're actually harming it. When the parasite is living outside of the organism's body, it's called an ectoparasite. If the parasite is living inside the victim's body, then it's an endoparasite. In this case, these parasitic wasps actually, although they're very harmful to the caterpillars, they're very helpful to a gardener because they actually end up killing off a lot of herbivoric insects that would otherwise be destroying farmlands or gardens. So they actually end up being helpful to the gardener, but still parasitic to the insect. So our next interaction we're going to look at here is competition. So competition is, again, interspecific means it's between two different species. And it's a negative interaction because it's never to either one's benefit to have to expend energy or time away from reproduction in order to compete for resources. And it only occurs when species are competing for a resource that's in short supply. So this again can lead to competitive exclusion when that strong competition actually eliminates one of the competing species. The competitive exclusion principle states that two species competing for the same limiting resource, the one in short supply, cannot coexist in the same place. So the pictures that we see up here is there's competition for nesting space and resources. And so this bird actually will lay its egg among the others and have it raised and nurtured by the bird that actually made this nest and laid the other eggs. And then what happens when the birds hatch, then this one outcompetes the others and is actually taking away the food from the others that were originally put there and placed there, and their nest was built there. Okay, now the last one we're going to look at on this tape is facilitation. So facilitation is actually defined as an interaction, although the species never really have direct or intimate contact with each other. So it's interspecific interaction just by definition. And what it means is one species is having a positive effect on another species without that direct contact. So we have that a lot with plants. In this case, juncus is a type of grass that makes soil more hospitable for other plant species. So you can see with that graph down below, the number of plant species, the biodiversity of those plant species is much higher when